In the spring of 2019, in a sale room in Geneva, a single emerald came up for auction. It was a beautiful stone, deep green, flawless, mounted in a modern diamond setting that gave away nothing about where it had been. It sold in a few minutes for more than 4 million Swiss francs to a private buyer who left no name. Almost no one in that room said out loud what that stone actually was. That it had once belonged to Catherine the Great. That it had passed down through the hands of Russian emperors for more than a century. That it had survived the revolution that destroyed the world that made it, and had come through it completely intact. The reason no one said it is simple. By 2019, it no longer looked like that stone. At some point in the 20th century, it had been cut down, reduced by nearly a third, to lift a single flaw out of the gem. And in the cutting, it had lost the one thing that made it an heirloom. It had lost its history. It had become, simply, a very fine emerald. This is a story about what the word survival really means when it comes to a jewel. Because that emerald was only one piece of one of the greatest private collections in the history of Europe, a collection that belonged to the grandest of the Russian Grand Duchesses. And here is the strange thing. Every jewel in it escaped the Russian Revolution. Not one was seized. Not one was lost to the Bolsheviks. They all got out. And within 50 years, in peacetime, in safety, in the drawing rooms of London and New York and Paris, almost none of them existed anymore. She left that collection to her 4 surviving children, divided by colour. This is the story of how 3 of those inheritances died, how one survived only as a stranger to itself, and how a single share came through exactly as it was, whole. We will not tell you yet which one. The grandest of the Grand Duchesses. She was born in 1854, Duchess Marie of Mecklenburg-Schwerin, a German princess of a small but ancient house. In 1874, she married Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich, a son of Tsar Alexander II, and became Grand Duchess Maria Pavlovna of Russia. With that marriage, she stepped into the wealthiest court on earth, and she never once looked as though she felt out of place there. She was clever, worldly, and formidably ambitious. And as the years passed and the reigning Tsar and Tsarina withdrew further and further from society, pulled inward by illness, by grief, by the terrible private strain of ruling a country that was beginning to come apart, Maria Pavlovna quietly took the ground they left behind. Her palace on the bank of the Neva became the real centre of aristocratic St. Petersburg. The dinners that mattered were her dinners. The invitations that mattered were hers. Foreign visitors, women like Consuelo Vanderbilt, who had married into the English aristocracy and seen every great house in Europe, came away describing the Vladimir Palace as the beating heart of imperial society. Her contemporaries had a name for her. They called her the grandest of the Grand Duchesses, and they did not mean it as a compliment exactly. They meant it as a fact. A woman who occupied that role could not dress like anyone else. She needed jewels that arrived in the room before she did. That told everyone present without a word precisely who she was and precisely how far above them she stood. And she had them. Over the decades, she assembled one of the most important private jewel collections in the world. Sapphires, rubies, diamonds, ropes of pearls, and, above all, emeralds. The emeralds were the center of it, and the greatest of them had come to her at the very beginning. When she married in 1874, the Tsar himself, Alexander II, gave her a wedding gift worthy of the family she was joining, a suite of emeralds built around a single hexagonal stone of roughly 100 carats, a gem so large it could anchor an entire parure on its own. And separately, he gave her something rarer still, a great step-cut emerald of more than 107 carats, mounted as a brooch. This was not a new stone bought for the occasion. It was one of the finest emeralds in the collection of Catherine the Great herself. a gem that had come down through the Russian throne from sovereign to sovereign, from Catherine to Tsar Paul to Alexander I, to Nicholas I, to Alexander II, who now placed it in the hands of his son's new bride. Think about what that means. Of everything Maria Pavlovna owned, this one stone carried the longest memory. It had been at the Russian court for 100 years before she ever touched it. It had watched emperors come and go, and she wore these emeralds, not locked in a vault but out, in the most dazzling settings the Imperial court could produce. By the accounts of those who were there, at the legendary costume balls of the Romanov court, she set the great stones into her headdress and fastened them at her breast. At the last of them, the famous ball of 1903, the most extravagant gathering Imperial Russia ever staged, she appeared draped in emeralds, the Catherine stone among them, at what would prove to be one of the final glittering nights of a world with only 14 years left to live. Held together in a single collection on a single woman at the center of a single court, these jewels meant one thing: permanence. They said, "This family has always been here and it always will be." They were wrong about that, and the emeralds would outlast the certainty they were meant to express. When the revolution came in 1917, Maria Pavlovna did not run. That was almost her undoing. She stayed too long, as many of her class did, unable to believe that the world they had built could actually fall. But her jewels, the emeralds, the sapphires, the rubies, the diamonds, the pearls, were placed in a concealed safe in the Vladimir Palace, in a city that was slipping, week by week, out of Imperial hands. We will not spend long on what happened next, because it has become one of the most retold stories in all of royal jewellery, and you have very likely heard it before. An Englishman named Albert Stopford, an art dealer who moved through Petrograd society with the ease of a man who knew every door, went into the palace with the help of Maria Pavlovna's son, Grand Duke Boris. Quietly, carefully, they emptied the hidden safe, and they carried more than 200 pieces of one of the great collections of Europe out of Russia and away to safety in London. It was an extraordinary rescue, but it was not a clean one. When the London jewellers Garrard laid the collection out and made an inventory of it in 1920, they recorded damage. Somewhere on that long, frightened journey out of a collapsing empire, pearls and diamonds had worked loose from their settings and were simply gone. Even in escaping, the collection had begun, very quietly, to come apart. As for Maria Pavlovna herself, she became the last of the Romanov Grand Duchesses to leave Russian soil. She reached the West at last, ill and exhausted, an empress of nothing, and she died in France in the autumn of 1920, only months after her jewels had arrived ahead of her. She had saved them. That was the one victory she was granted. What she could not do, what no will and no wish could do, was protect them from what her own children would be forced to do next. Maria Pavlovna had 5 children. Her eldest son had died in early childhood years before. That left 4 to inherit: 3 grown sons, Kirill, Boris and Andrei, and 1 daughter, Elena, by then married into the royal house of Greece. And here the story takes the turn that makes it unlike almost any other. According to the provenance later set down by Christie's, her collection was not divided by value or by piece or by sentiment. It was divided by colour. The sapphires went to Grand Duke Kirill. The emeralds, the greatest share, went to Grand Duke Boris. The rubies went to Grand Duke Andrei. And the diamonds and the pearls, including the tiara, went to her only daughter, Elena. On paper, it reads like the tidy settlement of an estate. In truth, it was the beginning of the collection's disappearance, because these were no longer people who could afford to keep such things. They were exiles now, grand in title, celebrated wherever they went, and one after another quietly running out of money. For the exiled Romanovs, jewels were not heirlooms to be handed down. They were the last hard currency standing between an imperial past and a future none of them had planned for. And so, one color at a time, a collection that had been assembled to last forever began to be sold. Follow each color to its end, and you are really watching the same thing happen 4 times over. 4 different deaths for 4 parts of a single treasure. 3 of them end in loss. 1 does not. Begin where the collection was richest, with the emeralds, Boris's share. Boris did what nearly all of them did in the end. He sold. And the buyer for stones of that importance in those years was almost always the same house, Cartier. Cartier did with them what the market always does with historic jewels. It took them apart. The great emerald necklace was unmounted, the stones reset into a long sautoir, and sold to an American heiress, Edith Rockefeller McCormick, a daughter of the Standard Oil fortune, remembered in the press of her day for having told reporters that she believed she had once, in a previous life, been the wife of an Egyptian pharaoh. When she died, the emeralds returned to Cartier. And from here, I want to be careful with you because this next stretch rests largely on the work of jewelry historians rather than on public records, so I will give it to you as it is reported, not as gospel. From here, the emeralds were sold on again to the most famous jewel collector of the age, Barbara Hutton, the Woolworth heiress, a woman whose fortune was matched only by the unhappiness that ran through her life. Hutton adored them. And in 1947, she did something no Russian Grand Duchess and no European queen would ever have dreamed of. She had Cartier's designer, Lucien Lachassagne, rebuild the Romanov emeralds into an Indian-inspired tiara of yellow gold, a piece that broke every convention of the Platinum Age and that could be taken apart and worn as a necklace. For a while, the emeralds that had blazed at the Imperial court had a strange second life on the head of an American heiress at parties in a villa in Tangier. And then, in the mid-1960s, Hutton sold them too, to the house of Van Cleef and Arpels. And Van Cleef did the one thing that ends a jewel's life for good. They unset the emeralds, and they sold them off one by one separately to whoever would buy them. That is where the trail simply stops. The great emerald suite of Grand Duchess Vladimir, the parure that had survived a revolution intact, no longer exists. There is no vault to point to. There is no case in a museum. The stones are out there somewhere, scattered across the world, in rings and pendants and private collections, in the hands of people who very likely have no idea what they are holding. The Bolsheviks never got those emeralds. The market did. And now we come back to where we began. Because there is one emerald in this story that should have vanished with all the rest, and did not. You remember it, the great step-cut stone of more than 100 carats, the one that had begun not with Maria Pavlovna at all, but with Catherine the Great, and had come down through 5 Russian sovereigns before it reached her. Of everything she owned, it carried the longest memory. By the accounts of those who saw it, her husband wore it in his hat at one of the great costume balls. She wore it at her breast at the last of them. When the collection was divided, this stone went to Boris along with the other emeralds, and in time, like the others, it too was sold to Cartier in 1927. But here at last, one stone's path breaks away from the rest. Cartier did not scatter it. On the advice of a master cutter, the emerald was recut, reduced from over 107 carats to just under 76, to lift a single flaw out of the heart of the gem. What remained was mounted anew and sold again, to the son of an American industrialist in 1954, to a buyer in Zurich in 1971, and at last in that Geneva sale room, to a private collector in 2019. So the stone survived. It is tonight still somewhere in the world, the only one of Maria Pavlovna's great emeralds you could still, in theory, hold in your hand. But look closely at what actually survived. Not the brooch that Catherine the Great had worn. Not the jewel that Maria Pavlovna fastened at her throat as Imperial Russia dressed for its final ball. The floor had been cut away, and with the floor went the shape, the setting, the name, the whole century of history that made it more than a beautiful green stone. The gem endured. The heirloom did not. It survived the way a coin survives a melting, intact, valuable, and no longer the thing it was. And that is the distinction this entire story turns on. Not whether something lasted, but whether it lasted whole. Hold on to that word, because there is one part of this collection and only one to which it still applies. But not the sapphires. They went to Kirill, and they went the way of the emeralds, only sadder and further. Kirill sold his sapphires to a cousin, Queen Marie of Romania, one of the most dazzling royal figures of the age. Marie bought a great sapphire tiara from what she affectionately called Aunt Misha's jewellery, buying it, in part, out of family loyalty, to put money into the hands of Kirill and his family as they struggled through exile. From Marie, the sapphire tiara passed to her daughter, Princess Ileana, and Ileana's own memoir turns the jewel's story into something close to tragedy. She describes carrying it out of Romania as the world convulsed a second time, through the Second World War and its aftermath, from Romania to Switzerland to Argentina, and finally to the United States. She describes pawning it, and she describes at last selling it, for a fraction of what it was worth, because she needed the money and had no choice. After that, in her own words, it was lost to history. No sale room has ever clearly claimed it since. Maria Pavlovna's sapphires are quite simply gone, dispersed across 3 continents by 2 wars and one family's long fall from grace. Which leaves the rubies and Andrei, the 3rd son, and the shortest chapter, because the rubies barely got the chance to have a story at all. Maria Pavlovna's rubies had been built in her lifetime into a magnificent tiara and corsage centered on a historic ruby once associated with the Beauharnais family, the family of Napoleon's Josephine. Andrei inherited them. And Andrei, pressed by exactly the same hardship as his brothers, took them back to Cartier and let them go, sold through the house to yet another wealthy woman of the era, Princess Anastasia of Greece, the American-born heiress the world had once known as Nancy Leeds. And beyond her, the trail simply ends. There is no later photograph. There is no museum case, no catalogue, no auction record that clearly names the Vladimir rubies again. They passed into private hands and were absorbed into the market, and the record closes over them like water. For all practical purposes, they too are gone. 3 sons, 3 colours, 3 collections, each once worthy of an empress, and not one of them survives today as a thing you could point to and name. Which leaves the daughter, Elena, and her share, the diamonds and the pearls. Among them was a tiara, 15 interlocking circles of diamond hung with pearl drops made for her mother decades earlier by Bolin, the Imperial court jeweller. If you follow royal jewellery at all, you have almost certainly seen it. But wait, because until this moment in our story, it has been only one share among 4, no more likely to survive than the emeralds or the sapphires or the rubies. Elena did what all of them did. She sold. But Elena sold to the one buyer on earth who would keep the piece whole for the next 100 years. Queen Mary of Britain, a more relentless, more knowledgeable collector of important jewels than her own imperial cousins had ever been. And so, around 1921, the tiara passed into the British royal collection. Mary had Garrard mend the damage the revolution had left in it, the very damage that 1920 inventory had recorded. And then she did something quietly ingenious. She had the tiara altered so that its pearl drops could be lifted out and replaced with emeralds from her own collection, so that one tiara could be worn two entirely different ways, in pearls or in green fire, depending on the night. It came down in 1953 to Mary's granddaughter, Queen Elizabeth II, and for the next 66 years it was hers, and she wore it more than almost any other tiara she owned, with pearls, with emeralds, and sometimes stripped to its bare interlocking circles. By 1988, it had been worn so hard that Garrard rebuilt its frame from the ground up. It appeared in public, on her head, for the last time in 2019. And so, at the end of it all, only one part of Grand Duchess Vladimir's collection came through the 20th century exactly as it was. Not the emeralds, dissolved into the market and scattered stone by stone. Not the sapphires, lost across 3 continents. Not the rubies, gone after a single sale. Not even the great Catherine emerald, which survived only by being cut into something else, something that had shed its own name. The tiara, Elena's share. It survived, and it survived whole. The same diamond circles Maria Pavlovna had worn at the Imperial court, worn a century later on the head of a reigning queen. Not recut, not broken up, not sold on and on until its history fell away. The one piece that stayed exactly, entirely itself. There is a temptation to call this a story about revolution. It isn't really. The revolution failed to destroy these jewels. Every single one of them escaped it. What undid them came afterward, and far more quietly: exile, debt, the slow, patient hunger of the market, which will take even the greatest stones apart and sell them off by the carat to anyone with the money to pay. 4 children inherited a collection built to outlast empires. 3 of those inheritances are gone without a trace. One survives only as a stranger to itself, a nameless emerald in a Geneva sale room, sold to a buyer who will likely never know that it once watched over the court of Catherine the Great. And one endured exactly as it began, not because it was the most valuable and not because it was the most beautiful, but because for once, at the right moment, someone chose to keep it whole. In the end, that is the only kind of survival that lets a jewel remain what it was. And of everything the grandest of the Grand Duchesses left behind, just one small share was ever granted it. If you'd like more stories like this one, the jewels, and the women who wore them, told with the care they deserve, consider subscribing. There are 2 new stories every week.